Boy, is this kid's future bright. Don't stare at me like that, buddy. You're scaring me. I know you got game. Let's dive into the game. Alireza Firouzja tied for second place, actually earned second overall at the World Rapid Chess Championship on tiebreaks, and no victory was sweeter or bigger than the last round one over Azeri Shakriyar Mamedyarov. What a game you're about to see here. Alireza Firouzja impresses, gives us educational takeaways. We see back and forth worthy of these two guys and their reputations. A sharp battle we are in for here today. Thanks, Yoda. Let's jump right in. We had a Caro Kann, but not to be a boring Caro, we'll say that. It's a two knights variation, one of the sharpest ones you can really play. And after bishop g4 with h3, we get the mainline theory here. Well, the main idea here is that black has parted with the bishop pair. Yes, right? But he's saying, I'd like to hold together my structure and keep it solid, keep it fresh here for the rest of the game, make it difficult for the two bishops to really find life. Especially when you can maintain a grip of the pawns on light squares. If we want to go further, might as well highlight the whole thing. It's not so simple that this bishop ever becomes the dominant piece it dreams to be. But what I really like about the strategic battle or maneuver, if you will, that went down here between these two guys is Alireza's understanding of that and his sort of slow play plan, his Jamie Foxx idea to eventually get that light square bishop to have a say and kind of force Mamedyarov's hand to be a little more aggressive on the dark squares than he wanted to be. So again, foreshadowing a little bit of where we're headed here, but if you're looking for what the strategic battle is of this opening, it's just that. Black has a better center. Black has control over the light squares and a very solid structure, but white has the long-term play of the two bishops, and Alireza in this case knew how to use it. He plays g3, put the bishop on this long diagonal, h1 to a8, usually the favorite of the light-squared minister. After castles, knight e7, we get the move rook to d1, which is not a novelty, but a borderline unorthodox move order, you might say. And Mamedyarov sort of takes the bait and jumps into to a truly original position with the move d4. The move knight to d7 would have transposed into more regular territory. Often white will play d4 and try to get this structure where the point is you're building on the tension, hoping at some point black blinks first, which of course will do what? Open up our bishop on this diagonal. Eventually, white is playing always for the long-term opening of the position. Breaking open of the center is going to help the bishops do what they do best. So that's where the game would be going. But Mamedyarov decides he's going to go ahead and play d4, call the kid's bluff, at the risk of maybe opening up more lines long-term here for the bishop. He really wants to get a grip, kind of a King's Indian position on the dark squares here. The knight comes back to b1. Knight e2 was also perfectly possible, but Alireza had a specific idea in mind here for this knight on the queen side. c5, d3, and after knight b to c6, we see the move that I've been kind of talking about was coming here for the young man from Iran, a4. Now, this idea holds back the light squares, the b5 punch, not going to happen when I bring my knight into the c4 square, and hopefully I can keep it there for a long while. The issue is that takes time. And in that meantime, black is getting castled and then going to try to prepare b5 so that you can't ultimately stop it. Bishop d2 is played, queen to c7, and after the move queen to e2, rook a to b8, here comes Alireza to c4. Now, he's sort of asking Mamedyarov if he has the guts to play b5 right now, because if you don't, you may never get it again. Take a peek at how white has set up the pieces here. Both knight and bishop and rook are actually all preparing to control the a5 square. So strategically, if black tried to play something any slower, white would get a5 and permanently clamp in the b6 square as an outpost, making it impossible forevermore to ever do things like this because en passant happens. Put it on a t-shirt. So this is the issue. The problem is that if b5 is played now like it was by Shak, white is able to trade and then grab the a-file almost forevermore when you think that this bishop, like a ninja, is spying that square, making it difficult. Now, this game has plenty of unclear moments ahead, so I'm not trying to paint the picture that somehow Alireza was already in control. Like any good rapid and blitz battle, it came down to time pressure and maybe one or two swindles missed by your opponent to get a victory. But I do think if we were just pausing and reflecting right now at who won the first stage of the game, who set themselves up for the right strategic plan here heading the middle game, I do think it is Firouzja, because not only is he going to be given a slight edge here according to the engines because of the bishop pair, rightfully so, but I just think the position is much easier for white to play. And the fact that you've got this knight to a5, the fact that you're going to be able to trade on c6, open the a file for your rook forever, and then figure out what you want to do with your bishops. Do you want to play for f4, right, and expand over here on the king side? These are the things that Firouzja can choose to go for, and he actually did. He traded and then got that dual pawn center. I think that, again, if you're just looking at this position, he's put himself in a great spot, playing very quickly, got the slight edge. You got to be happy for the kid who has clearly arrived at this point, right, playing in the top boards at the World Rapid. So, knight e7 was played, and he gets e5. He's opened the bishop finally. The control over the a file in the light squares has happened. This is sort of the storyline I've been foreshadowing all game, and white is better, no doubt. c4 comes from Mamedyarov, makes sense, right? You've got all your pieces primed for a breakthrough on the queen side, so try to make it happen. We get the move bishop to b4, threatening to play bishop to d6, and this is the biggest part of, probably the most critical moment in the game. If black doesn't want to lose the exchange, he has to make some sort of very committal moves now, right? He has to find a way to move the queen to avoid bishop to d6. He has to find a way to move the rook, which actually doesn't even work because going to b6, bishop a5 happens. So with c4, while I highlighted that this was the idea that Mamedyarov had to go for, given it's where his pieces are, given that white really owned the king side of the board once Firouzja got f4 and e4 together, the problem with this idea is that probably the best thing that he could go for in the game was exactly what he did with knight f5. But Firouzja was ready for it. He was ready to open the king side and go get himself that beautiful rook on b8. Probably Mamedyarov's best chance at this point is to recognize he doesn't have really any right to try to be better in this game and to just trade things off. He didn't play knight takes d1 to go exchange for exchange. I analyzed it here. I think that after something like rook takes or queen takes, actually, either way, you're going to get positions where white has a little bit of the better situation with control over the only open file. That leads to the first person with a rook on the 7th rank. It also leads to maybe potential things on the light squares. The risk of that is that if white ever plays too aggressively for a win in his own right, probably he can get himself in trouble on the dark squares too, right? And if we think about other types of diagonals, dynamically, the position is probably still very balanced. Even though, like I said, I think I like Firouzja's position. I think Mamedyarov would have been just fine. Position is probably about equal. The problem is Mamedyarov wanted more at this point. He decided to take on b8, letting the knight on e3 stick, in hopes that he might get tons of compensation for the exchange. What I really like about what Firouzja did here is he recognized what was happening in the game, meaning he has an option to keep his exchange, to keep his material, right, and be happy. And as a young player, maybe he wants that material and gets excited about the win, right? But he really shows his maturity here and understanding that, yes, Mamedyarov has sacrificed the exchange, and no, I don't really want to let him take it back. We're with the opposite code bishops. Probably the best I can get is a draw. At the same time, I have to respect my opponent's compensation here. The point is, if you try to save the rook with anything, rook e1, anything else, rook c1, both of these moves are allowing really Shak's key idea to the exchange stack. He wants to move g5, exclam. This type of thing would open up the dark squares, where not only am I going to get compensation for the exchange, I'm probably going to get a mating net to go with it. This move g5 is actually black's biggest threat on the board. Probably after f takes, you could even take e5 right away with the bishop if you want. But either way, black's compensation will be real, right? No longer a fantasy. I think that seeing Firouzja's move here, if you want to pause the video and guess it, if somehow you haven't seen this game, go ahead and do it now because I'm going to talk about it. It is really just a sign of his maturity. Really puts, I think, the pressure on Mamedyarov to admit, all right, I can only be worse. Let me just take the exchange back. Because if he doesn't do it now, he'll never get a chance to do it again. And that's the move g5 himself, exclam. This says, I'm going to hold down the fort, not going to let you break open the dark squares, and you either take back your material or you regret it. Unfortunately, for Mamedyarov, the latter happened. He played bishop to f8. A question mark move that allows Firouzja to keep the material, and he does so. Probably if you take on d1 and the queen trades, we have a similar situation I said before. I like white. The A file is critical. It's the only open file. Don't ever forget those educational principles. Open files, open squares, open diagonals are like commodities. Supply and demand is the sort of the law that governs the value of everything, right? And when there's less, the value is higher. And in these situations, it's not a surprise that strong players want to avoid that because it just feels bad. I know a lot of you are going to turn on the engine and criticize me right now and say, Danny, you're full of it. It's equal. And, you know, you're not wrong, right? But I think it's a difficult position to want to play as black when white controls really the only inroads. And that's the main point I want to make about maybe why Mamedyarov didn't go for it. He played bishop f8, but now Firouzja keeps that extra exchange, right? Cash money. I'm going to keep my rook. Take g5, I'll take it. King to g7. And at this point, I think Firouzja is already just clearly better. He actually makes a big mistake here. Both players, I guess you would say, overestimated/underestimated the importance of the h-file over the next few moves. The engine's line is actually king f2, which clears the h-file for things like queen f3, rook h1, and queen h3. I'm really not going to hold it against Firouzja that in time pressure he didn't find this plan. King f2 is kind of a tricky move to play. But you could have maybe played queen f3 and had the same idea, right? The same idea of getting this diagonal and this. Both of those moves would have been better than what Firouzja did, either king f2 or queen f3. He played queen f2, which blocks his own queen. And after bishop to b4 and the queen comes to h8, at this exact moment, after we get the trade here, if Mamedyarov doesn't overestimate his own need to use the h-file, he had gotten himself back in just enough. Bishop to c3 instead of the move queen h5 was the key thing to do. Now, the main point I want to highlight is it's not like Firouzja wasn't still going to be better. If you go for something like this in bishop f1, I think that probably the h-file is very dangerous. But if you look at it with an engine, lines like takes and takes c2, it's obviously very unclear, right? Clearly, black has some compensation based on the position of white's king, based on the fact that he's probably going to get a passed pawn. So that's another reason why this move queen f2 by Firouzja was the move that almost let Shak back in the game. But Mamedyarov doesn't go for it. Daddy Shak plays queen h5. Unfortunately, that makes it baby Shak's day. He plays rook a8, and then after getting the 8th rank, we find the final combination that exposes full board awareness, if you will, here from Firouzja to see the potential weakness of this king. If you want to pause the video, you can. He finds the move bishop f3, followed by queen h2, and the whole key is that I can give up my bishop because that's checkmate on h8. This forced the queens off the board, and with the endgame, Firouzja is just totally winning, pretty easy. Bishop to e4, rook to d8, the d-pawn is falling. Shak makes sure that Firouzja has been doing his puzzle rush to get ready for that Puzzle Battle World Chess Championship with the move d2. Just make sure he can find the pin. Indeed, Firouzja does. He takes d2, and Mamedyarov resigns, because if he takes, you lose the rook, and with it, the game. So, just a very high-level victory here for Alireza Firouzja, who's knocking on the door right now with the world's elite. He was this close to getting his first world championship title, right? It's rapid, but still. Now he'll have the Blitz ahead, and I don't think anybody wants to play this guy as they head into the faster portion. So again, I'm going to ask him to put away the laser stare here that he's got coming at me, and go play some Blitz here in Moscow.